Your FJ looks huge.
Hey man.
Are you putting creatine in your gas tank?
Dude, I don't want people to know my secrets. Well, hello everyone. I have indeed bolted 37s onto my FJ Cruiser. It's a very big tire for this platform, and I don't think anybody's done it in quite the way I have or will. Because in today's video, I will show you what I've done so far to be able to at least drive it on-road. It's not clearanced yet for off-roading, I will admit that. But so that I can at least drive it around, you know, and break a few necks. The other thing I want to show you is a few parts that I'm going to be bolting onto this to help either fit the 37s or just as I continue to drive on them, parts that will help keep the FJ running for a long time reliably with them. And then the last thing I want to show you is I'll pop the hood and show you the few modifications I've done for power just to help turn such big tires. This 4-liter just needs all the help it can get because these are quite massive tires. You also might notice on the video, I will just mention, I have a big red welt on my face. The inflammation has subsided a bit, but I got bitten by a spider. And I was really hoping I'd become like Peter Parker, but so far I have no superpowers. So if you notice that, it was from a spider, but unfortunately I'm not Spider-Man yet. So the tires I decided to do on the FJ are 37 by 12.5 R17 Cooper STT Pros. And I've always liked how the Coopers look, and I've wanted to run them for a while. The upside to this particular set is it's only 75 pounds per tire in the 37s. So that's very light for 37s. And what that will do is just be a little easier on the front end components and a little bit better with gas mileage and power versus doing some of the other options out there that are quite a bit heavier. So if you come a little bit closer to the wheel well here, I'll just start to show you what's been done. So you'll notice this looks very different than the firewall on a standard FJ. And I have photos that I will include in the video, but this whole section of the firewall got cut out and then tubbed. So this, even behind this plastic, it goes all the way up to here. The firewall's been moved back for tire clearance, and you can see down here the body mount relocation that I've mentioned in past videos. Also with my sliders, those got cut and custom shortened just to give as much clearance to the firewall area as possible. Because unlike a lot of people, I have not done long travel suspension. I'm still on a mid-travel setup, and when you do a long travel setup, not only does that push the tires out, depending on the length of the suspension system, usually the standard one is 2 inches. Not only does it push it out 2 inches, often it moves it at least an inch or two forward as well. So that can help a lot with the clearance there for fitting 37s. I haven't done that. I've gone about it a different way than most people. I have decided to trim and cut and fit them versus doing a long travel setup, just because being here in Canada with our winters, a fully sealed mid-travel setup just lasts a lot longer and doesn't make the noise of most long travel setups. One other thing I want to mention that not a lot of people understand is on an IFS platform like this, lift height does not fit bigger tires. What you really have to do is clearance for them. The only things that help with fitting bigger tires is moving your bump stops down, because that will limit your travel upwards. So there's a few different theories of thought on limiting travel. Some people say it's not that big of a deal. Some people want as much travel as possible. In the front end, I decided not to do a full wheel well tub because that involves often relocating the battery. On the other side, my airbox is pretty big, so that probably would have gotten in the way, my intake. So what I'm gonna do in the front end is, I'll show you very soon because I have them here. I'm gonna do slightly extended bump stops. It just a little bit can sometimes be the difference between rubbing or not. So I'll be doing that for the travel upwards. You'll also notice I have the factory flares still. These have been heavily cut and gutted to help fit, but I have a set of wide fenders coming from overseas, but they got lost in shipping. So when those will show up, I'm not sure. So in the meantime, I'm gonna just keep customizing the factory ones because I really like the flare look. So yes, for fitment, I've really clearanced the whole firewall area as much as basically possible. For the travel going upwards. I'm going to limit it a little bit with bump stops. And on the other side, the FJ 2010 and up, the earlier models 2007 to 9 don't have this, but the 2010 and up have their washer bottle right down here. Now what's happened with my 37 is because it's so big, it's actually come and rubbed a hole through my washer bottle. But I will show you in a couple minutes here, I have a relocation kit that will move that up into the engine bay, and that won't be an issue anymore. So the main place I currently rub on road is that washer bottle. Every now and then, I still touch a few plastics in the wheel well when the tire moves around, but I'm just going to keep trimming those until that's all gone. At the moment, I'm not rubbing any of the metal. The firewall's out of the way. And in the back, the place where I would rub right now if I went off-road is on those flares as well. There's just not enough clearance for the up travel. So the FJ's in a car show this week, but after that we're probably going to do something custom and cut the back here, maybe do some custom flaps, just until those aftermarket flares arrive, whenever that is. Now some people are going to ask, you have a 37-inch spare on your factory rear carrier on your door. Are you worried about it? And as I mentioned earlier, this tire weighs 75 pounds, which is very light for a 37, because the 35-inch mud tire I had on my back door last summer was 78 pounds, so 3 pounds heavier than the 37. So technically, that's actually more stress on the door because it's sitting in the same position, and even though it's a little bit smaller, it was heavier. The other thing I have is, I know I mentioned in a previous video, I have a custom relocation bracket on here. And now that was for my 35, but it happens to just perfectly work with the 37-inch tire. The tire ever so slightly rubs the bumper, which means it's not affecting the door opening or closing at all, but this tire can't actually move around very much off-road because it's actually sitting on that bumper. So this setup was, if I tried to highly calculate everything, do the math, and figure out the perfect setup, this would be it. As it was, it just happened to be luck. I bolted on the 37 and the door shut. And I was like, this is brilliant, because I was really worried it was going to hit that bumper and not close. So am I worried about it? Not really, because I've had zero issues with the 35s for years. I did at one point, I will explain this one quickly. I did at one point have a little bit of door sag. What I did is I undid all the bolts just behind here on the hinges. And once I did that, I lifted the door slightly without the tire on it, and then I retightened those bolts, and that just brought the door back up perfectly into place. Since then, I have had no issues at all with sagging or other issues with the rear door. Okay, so now for the stuff in the boxes. The first thing I'm going to show you, and that I'm going to be putting on my FJ, are these bump stops from Perry Parts. Now, I saw some testing videos they've done online versus the competition, and I've run about 3 or 4 of their competitors' bump stops over time just to try out different setups. And so seeing them compared and even outperforming some of the other ones interested me. And one thing that is very interesting that they've done is they 3D print these bump stops, and yet they've been able to make them so that they're progressive. So they sent me one that's cut open so that I could show you all what it looks like inside. I don't have a lot of knowledge of 3D printing, but you can just see as you go down, it gets thicker and thicker, and therefore it gets stiffer. And there is flex to these. They look like hard plastic, but I can bend this one with my hands. So this will give a much softer impact than the factory ones, which are just a hard piece of rubber. The other thing is with the extra length, that'll soften that blow. And what Perry Parts has done, which is brilliant, is they've done a lot of testing. So these bump stops here are actually measured out and keep 35s on 4Runners, Tacomas, FJs out of that fender well. Like I was saying, if you don't extend your bump stop, no matter how much lift you run, your suspension will still travel to the same point. The trick is, if you put a bump stop there, it'll stop it from traveling quite as far as it would have before. So these ones are made for 35s. We're going to work together potentially on a setup to make it work perfectly for 37s. And the rear ones I'll be doing, because I plan to trim the rear, but there's a chance I'll need to extend it slightly. So they sent me their long travel rear bump stops. They're a little bit longer, and at some point, it's not going to happen right away, but I would love to still do long travel in the back of the FJ, so these will make sense then. For now, I'm going to try them just with getting the 37s dialed as much as possible. I'm going to be trying the long travel length ones because they're just a little bit longer than the standard ones. So these are the bump stops that I'll be running, and those are from Perry Parts, made in the USA. And I will go get the next thing to show you that I'll be putting on my FJ. So to turn the big 37, some people might say, will the FJ factory steering rack hold up to that? Now, I have done braces on the tie rods to keep those from bending, but this is what I've decided to do now that I'm properly on 37s. I want it to be reliable, and so what this is from Toyo Steering. It's a Tundra steering rack. It's been shortened, even internally, so that it'll work on an FJ well without causing bump steer. There's a few other companies that were using, I think, Land Cruiser or Tundra steering racks, but the issue people were having on a mid-travel setup like mine is they would add a lot of bump steer. Now, I already have some bump steer just due to the width I'm running and the offset, so this will just give me a much beefier setup for actually being able to turn off-road and not have to worry about blowing a steering rack. And the other nice part about doing a Tundra rack is it comes with Tundra tie rods. Now, I brought a fully assembled FJ inner and outer tie rod, and you can kind of see there's a bit of a thickness difference here. So whereas this one could fairly easily blend with 37s, this one, I don't actually know how you'd go about bending that on an FJ without like flying off a cliff. So it comes with the inner, outer, the boot. So once that's assembled, you can just imagine that's a very beefy setup, one that's not going to bend with 37s at all. So that's from Toyo Steering, and yeah, these just will thread together into something that should be basically unbreakable. Okay, so here's the last modification, other than those flares that I mentioned that got lost in shipping somewhere overseas. Once those show up, those will also go on. But other than that, this is the last modification I have planned at the moment for helping to fit 37s. This is a fully aluminum washer tank from Snowbound Customs. It will replace the one that hangs down, and it'll put it actually into the engine bay. This one was made for a 4th gen 4Runner, but we took a quick look and we were like, you know what, we bet it's gonna fit and it's gonna bolt up perfectly. My intake is a little bit bigger than the factory one, so they might just touch a little bit, but otherwise it'll mount into the bolt, it'll mount into the fender perfectly. And I know it's still wrapped up, but the welds on this thing, you have to appreciate it. It's just dimes. This is really, I mean, it's so beautiful that it's sad that it's gonna be hidden underneath the hood. But underneath the hood has a couple of other things that I haven't mentioned in the past. People have wanted to know, what have you done for power? This is a very dirty AFE Momentum GT intake. And most people would be like, intakes, they only make noise on engines like this. They don't actually add power. And that would be true if I didn't have this little black box back here. This is a plug and play MAF controller from Yordi that's tuned to this intake. And although the power gains are not crazy, they're definitely in the higher end of the RPM. You can feel it quite a bit compared to the stock setup. Now, tied to that, I also have an exhaust system that they don't sell anymore. I know I showed it in one of my last videos. It's got an equal length Y pipe. It removes the rear 2 cats. And so basically what it does is the intake pulls in more air. That MAF controller messes around with the air and fuel ratio or mixture, and then it just flows out of this exhaust that has a higher flow rate than the factory one. So altogether, that gets me a little bit of power. How much, I don't 100% know, but it is noticeable from before having it to now having it. The one big thing with 37s, especially on a V6 like this, is you need gears. I think I talked about it in another video that I did 488 gears, and I personally found it to be over-geared a little bit on 35s. For 37s, I think it's perfect. On the highway, it sits at a fairly nice rev range, and around town, it just feels good. I've got some decent power off the line. It's not going to win any races, but there's still a little bit of pep there. And so those 488s just really get it moving. And then after that, the few other modifications I've done kind of help just aid in moving it forward. The FJ is never going to be a fast vehicle, and part of that is due to the aerodynamics. If you look at it, it's pretty much, I mean, slightly rounded, but it's a box. That windshield is more upright than even a Jeep or Hummer or Bronco windshield. And in the wind, that just correlates to a terrible aerodynamic block going through the wind. So around town, this thing honestly feels fairly good on the 37s. I have no complaints. Obviously, everybody wants more power, but it drives quite well. The one place where it does feel a bit underpowered is on a highway with a headwind coming towards you. Then it's the setup. The tires are wide, they're chewing through the wind, the windshield's flat, you know, the bumper, high clearance. It means all the suspension parts and everything are just causing more drag. And so that's really the place where I'm like, oh, it could use more power. It doesn't need more gears. The 488s I feel are a perfect setup. It's just, that's the one place where, you know, a supercharger, or even if there was just more power to this engine, would definitely help. But overall, it doesn't feel that much different than the slightly heavier 35s I had on last summer. So I'm quite happy with how it's driving now. I hope you all enjoyed today's video, and I hope you're as excited as I am to see 37s dialed on the FJ. It's going to be quite the process. It might take a bit of time, but I knew that going into it just because it's not something that's commonly done, and I'm kind of figuring out a few things for myself. I will have another exciting video shortly here. I'm going to be swapping out the headlights and turn signals for a full new setup. This one that I have right now is custom. That setup is going to be one that you can go on the Freedom Outfitters website and buy. It's going to be called the Stealth Series. I won't give any more away, but we'll be installing them and giving you a real close look at the new setup. Also, one other exciting thing is that I might have another vehicle coming, and it might also end up on 37s. So, anyways, more on that later. I hope you all have a good one.